Hi everyone, thanks for joining. We'll give it a minute and just let the other attendees kind of filter in. I see quite a few popping online, and then we'll kick off. Right, I think with a decent number of people in the room, let's make a start. Welcome today. Thanks for joining to discuss what is a really important issue for the sector in off-grid solar. And we, as GOGLA, are partnering with British International Investment, BII, for this webinar today. Actually, if you'll just go to the next slide, please. Some general points on housekeeping. So please do mute yourself if you're not automatically muted as you join. We will have a question and answer session at the end of the webinar, and we have the Q&A function available. So if you pop your questions in there, we'll try and get to as many as possible at the end. We are recording this webinar, but we will switch this off when we get to the Q&A session, just because of the sensitive nature of the topic as well. So feel free to speak openly and ask questions during that time. So I'll first introduce Sarah and Akshara, and then we'll go into kind of really just awareness raising for what is the issue and the risk around gender-based violence and harassment, how companies can implement procedures and policies to mitigate and address the risk, and how the commitment from senior management really is the first place to start as we move forward. And then as we wrap up, we'll kind of share a little bit of detail about kind of further work we intend to do on this topic in the next year in partnership with BII. So we have two great speakers today. First, Akshara, who is the E&S specialist and GBVH lead in BII, and Sarah Marm, the Executive Director of GOGLA. So I'll just hand over to Sarah for some opening remarks, and then we'll get underway.
Thanks, Rebecca. And thank you all for joining us today. Gender-based violence and harassment is a reality in every sector and every community. It is both a global challenge and an intensely local one, affecting people's safety, emotional and physical well-being, and ultimately their ability to work and thrive. In the off-grid sector, our distributors and agents are the backbone of service delivery. They connect households and businesses to life-changing products in both urban centers and the most remote communities. These roles offer income, independence, and opportunities, but they also come with risks, particularly for women. Some risks stem from the nature of work itself, others from cultural norms and societal pressures. And for companies, GBVH also presents real operational, financial, and employer responsibility risks. There is no single solution. The root causes are complex, and lasting change often requires shifts in culture and behavior. Today marks an important step in what I hope will become a longer-term commitment, raising awareness, sharing practical tools, and building a shared approach to reducing GBVH across the off-grid solar industry. We recognize that many smaller distributors do not have extensive resources for training, reporting, or formal systems, and none of us alone can overturn deep-rooted biases or broader prevalence of GBVH. What we can do is work together, support one another, and push for safer, more respectful, and more productive working environments across our ecosystem. My hope today is that the work will continue and feed into conversations that we will bring to our global off-grid solar forum in October in Kigali. Today, GOGLA is pleased to join BII in presenting flexible, practical guidance designed to help off-grid solar companies, especially distributors, prevent, mitigate, and respond to GBH risks in their operations. I want to acknowledge the leadership and commitment of the companies already taking action to ensure their staff and agents are safe. And a sincere thank you to the BII team for their collaboration and sharing their expertise with us today. I also want to acknowledge the support from the World Bank, who has approached GOGLA with an interest in contributing to addressing GBVH in the sector. With that, I am pleased to hand this over to Akshara to take us through the presentation.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and thanks to everyone for joining the webinar today. My name is Akshara Gopinath, and as Rebecca mentioned, I'm part of the ENS team at BII, which is the UK's Development Finance Institution. We at BII, we've been working on GBVH risk management, opportunities for collaboration, and support over the last 7 years, and we see this partnership with GOGLA as a very exciting opportunity to support the off-grid solar ecosystem in assessing and managing GBVH risks. It is a critical need for businesses to address these risks. There is a heightened risk in models that we're looking at in the off-grid solar sector, and we'll spend a bit more time today discussing this, but we hope to bring in the different players in the industry to work together in addressing this very important issue that affects both productivity, mental health, physical well-being, and also commercial needs of a business. So just a quick overview on BII. So for those who are not familiar, BII, which is British International Investment, is the UK's Development and Finance Institute. It's one of the oldest DFIs in the world, and we currently invest across Africa, South Asia, Southeast Asia, and the Caribbean. We invest across multiple sectors and have a very unique dual mandate. We are responsible for delivering productive, sustainable, and inclusive impact via our investments, and also to make sustainable financial returns. As part of these mandates, we have a very clear policy on responsible investing, which outlines our environmental and social obligations, of which gender-based violence and harassment is a very key pillar of our commitments, in line with the UK government's commitments, as well as the ILO 190 on harassment in the workplace. So the objective for today's webinar is essentially to understand GBVH risk in the context of the off-grid solar sector. We're hoping to share some good practice from companies that we've seen working in the sector, and also opportunities to strengthen your existing systems, your approach, and the way to engage on this very sensitive topic. We will be discussing some sensitive topics, examples, situations. And so I did want to add a disclaimer at the beginning for anyone that might be impacted by some of the discussions today. So jumping in, what is GBVH? So GBVH, which is gender-based violence and harassment, is defined as violence or harassment targeted at or disproportionately affecting people of a certain sex or gender. It is an umbrella term used to cover many forms of harassment. So we've got the sexual forms of harassment, things like, sexual assault, rape, physical forms, physical abuse, stalking, psychological, so bullying, threats of physical force, and also perhaps the less familiar version of GBVH, which is the economic, which is essentially, propositions and sexual advances in exchange for economic benefits, such as an increase in pay, progressions, etc. All of these forms of GBVH will be discussed today, including an up-and-coming version of GBVH around digital harassment as well, which is very common, especially when it's related to workplace communications. GBVH can have many forms as outlined. It could be one or more of these combinations, and it could be also one-off incident or a pattern of behavior. So gender-based violence and harassment is widespread across most sectors and most countries. In the off-grid solar sector specifically, GBVH could often be perpetrated in some of these situations. So it could occur during the identification of prospective clients or sales, in the delivery of products, including the installation and maintenance, during the payment collection from customers, traveling between locations, and also during work-related training, social, or the recruitment process. For the discussions today, we will be focusing on incidents that occur for sales agents, and we'll discuss what we mean by the agent model in a bit. But just to say that, companies need to have assessed risks across the various stakeholders that are included, that are involved in the entire operations of the off-grid solar sector, from the initial identification to the final installation, maintenance, and ongoing activities. So why should companies take GBVH seriously? So GBVH can have long-term and damaging impacts on individual health and well-being, but it can also have severe operational, financial, legal, and reputational impacts on a business. Companies that take action to create a safe and respectful workplace for everyone can improve the well-being amongst workers, local communities, strengthen their reputation as responsible employers, boost productivity, and attract the best workers as well. We pulled out some examples here on, impacts to businesses and individuals. From a reputational perspective, companies do face loss of confidence from investors. There is a damaged community and client relation aspect to consider as well. And there are unexpected costs due to kind of legal fees that could be associated by the mismanagement of GBVH incidents. From a productivity and health and safety perspective for the workforce, including sales agents, it's very likely that there will be fewer sales if there is a reputation of an unsafe working environment. There will be disruption to installation maintenance. It will be difficult to retain good talent, and there is a higher risk of injury due to agents being distracted and not wanting to put themselves in unsafe situations. And finally, the access to skilled agents and attrition rates as well is increasing in a poor working environment. These are some of the most direct impacts that we've seen relating to the workforce when safeguarding or GBVH systems are not adequate. In addition to sort of the long-term impacts on individual health and well-being, they also, as we've shown, have material negative impacts on businesses and the commercial value of a business as well. Today, we're going to be talking a lot about agents or gig workers. And when we mention these terms, what we are referring to is the contractor models, which are commission-based. They are quite informal in their working model. They don't have set working times, set working locations. They are fairly remote and operate independently. They're also referred to as commission-based agents in the sector, but they'll generally be involved in operations such as sales, identifying potential customers, installation, or maintenance services. However, there could be additional tasks undertaken in companies as well. The key characteristics for these agents is that they have a very informal working model. They are typically self-employed, paid on a commissions basis, so either per sale or per installation made, and they're very mobile. So they're quite remote. They don't have a set office, for example, or working environment, and their work involves direct contact with potential customers, existing customers, and other sort of vulnerable stakeholders as well. Okay, great. So we're now going to have time for a quick poll. We'd like to understand from your perspective what factors you think increases the risk of GBVH within the gig worker model. So we are going to bring up a poll now. If Puck can just bring up that poll, and we'd like you to pick two factors that you think are the key risks of GBVH for gig workers. We'll give it about a minute and then we can discuss the findings that have come through. So these are particular factors that agents or commission-based agents, gig workers face that could increase the risk of GBVH in their operations. Okay, maybe we can move to the results if we see results coming in. Okay, so we've got a clear sort of response on the context of operations in, areas of high gender inequality that seems to have the highest risk factor for increasing GBVH, followed by the commission-based structures. So the fact that, they are paid on a sales basis, on a per sales basis, so they do have high sales targets that will put them in unsafe conditions. The remote nature of work, so the informal working hours, there's no set time. They could go to customers' residences at any point. And then also the weak regulatory framework in the area. Great. Thank you so much for your responses. And yes, that's absolutely right. So there's many factors that could increase the risk of GBVH, especially within this kind of working model. Now it also should be flagged that GBVH incidents can be perpetrated either by the sales agents or by customers, so towards sales agents and between agents as well. So there's several factors that need to be considered in this kind of ecosystem. So operations in countries with weak regulatory frameworks does increase the risk of GBVH. I think understanding of what is illegal versus, what is socially acceptable, the fact that, the fear of regulatory authorities not taking action within a sufficient amount of time, and just not having access to resources does increase the risk of incidents. The context of high gender inequality, definitely, and that is something that we're going to be talking about. As we already picked up on the poll, the informal working model, so the remote nature of work and the fact that the payments are commission based increases, puts agents in a position to take on further risks and, perhaps opens them up to GBVH risks. The intermittent nature of the work relationship as well. Agents might, sign up one day and they might not sign up for the next 6 months. So it is very hard to raise awareness regularly and develop the trust in the systems that companies set up. And then the direct interaction with vulnerable stakeholders, such as, the community members, potential customers. All of these are definitely risks that, by itself or as a combination of different situations can increase the risk of GBVH, increasing the power dynamics between individuals and the frequency of isolated work as well. So these are some of the risks which are quite unique to the gig worker model, and which is why we feel there is a need for more tailored guidance on the topic. So now that we've covered kind of what the risk is, why companies need to be addressing this risk, how the risk can occur in operations, we're going to spend some time discussing what can companies and investors actually implement to manage this risk of GBVH in their operations. So firstly, it's very important to understand a very key term in GBVH risk management. So this is called a survivor-centered approach. People who have experienced GBVH are often referred to as survivors. This terminology is used to emphasize the resilience and agency that these individuals face, as opposed to victim, which can reinforce a sense of powerlessness amongst those who experience GBVH. A survivor-centered approach means consistently prioritizing the rights of GBVH survivors and using these as a starting point for all decisions on efforts to assess, prevent, monitor, and respond to GBVH risks that occur in the workplace. It is the suggested way of addressing GBVH that helps reduce the potential for further harm and retaliation and the likelihood of further financial and reputational risk to companies. So survivor-centered approach has essentially four key elements. The first one is safety. So it is vital to ensure that the survivor is safe from immediate and further harm from retaliation. Confidentiality is another key kind of pillar of survivor-centered approach. One of the reasons GBVH is inherently underreported is the fear of, the identity of the individual being widespread and facing further retaliation. So confidentiality throughout the entire process needs to be emphasized and re-emphasized, as it is very, very key to supporting survivors. The third element is respect. So all survivors need to be treated with dignity and respect. Companies and experienced individuals should take the time to listen to what survivors have to say, rather than rushing to action. This includes treating them equally, non-judgmentally, making sure their experience is not unfairly dismissed because of factors that have nothing to do with the incident. So, for example, their age, race, community, religion, etc. And then the final key pillar of survivor-centered support is ensuring that survivors can make informed decisions of what they need and providing them with information about support options available. So we will be discussing what this means in practicality when it comes to companies and what can be offered to agents as well in more detail. So whilst the focus is on survivors, we should also flag that both survivors and witnesses will fall within the scope of any support, confidentiality, and safety that is implemented after an incident is reported or during an investigation process as well. Elements of the survivor-centered approach will need to be embedded into the entire GBVH system, so all the policies, procedures that companies develop. So GBVH system consists of multiple components. The foundation of a good system is a GBVH risk assessment. This enables companies to assess where in their operations GBVH has a heightened risk of occurrence, contextual elements that increase the risk or the vulnerability agents and customers might face, and the current resourcing at the company to manage this risk. A GBVH policy is critical for cementing a company's commitments to managing this risk. Having a regular and accessible training is another key element of prevention. Reporting channels and investigation methods is vital to response to incidents and to ensure all survivors and witnesses are protected in line with a survivor-centered approach. Finally, there needs to be an approach to monitoring, which will ensure that the systems are up to date, accessible, and fit for purposes. We will discuss each of these elements in detail. However, it should be noted that these could differ based on the type of organization, stage of the business, and size of the agent workforce. So it does have to be developed and tailored very much to the company's context, what's required, and what is most accessible to the employee base and the agent workforce. So the first element, which is the foundation of a good GBVH management system, is a GBVH risk assessment. So they have different components, and they're generally undertaken by experienced specialists with a background in identifying and responding to GBVH risk. So the first sort of component of a GBVH risk assessment is reviewing a company's operations to identify where and how GBVH incidents could occur in the business. So this needs to take into consideration all aspects of operations, including customer-facing activities, any digital communication, and external stakeholder exposure as well. This can be done by essentially reviewing the different operational procedures, speaking to different teams within the organization, and identifying a risk register at each stage of the business and how these incidents could occur. This could also be done by engaging with the sales force, with the agent workforce, with the community, with potential customers, etc., to understand the risk. The second step is a contextual review and a contextual risk assessment. So it is critical to understand the context of operations and any additional vulnerability factors that can cause a GBVH risk. Why is context review important? In many markets, in many countries, gender norms affect how society expects women and men to behave in a given context, including what jobs they should be doing, what clothes they should be wearing, and what kind of behavior is considered normal. This might also mean that harassment is highly normalized in some contexts or that it is not acceptable for people to challenge these norms or talk about these experiences openly. Hence, understanding the social context, the regulatory framework, experiences of agents and communities will support the company in designing interventions to increase awareness of GBVH risk, and at the same time ensuring sensitivity to local cultural context and social dynamics. Once companies have identified where their risks lie, they should then ensure that they can mitigate these risks, which includes an assessment of the company's own systems, capacities, and resources to respond effectively to these risks. When companies are operating in high-risk contexts, so this is, for example, in countries where there is conflict, where there is fragile ecosystems, where there is engagement with underage stakeholders and other vulnerable stakeholders, we would suggest involving greater allocation of resources, including external specialists to support in the reviewing of risks and implementing of interventions. When the initial assessments indicate that there is a high risk of GBVH or indicate that there are significant gaps in the company's own capacity and resources, they should seek support from an external GBVH expert. So this could typically include women's rights organizations, NGOs, international organizations with local or national offices, and other local specialists that have a background in legal investigations, specifically GBVH investigations, etc. Working with a local expert can also allow the company to establish a source of ongoing support, boosting their capacity to address GBVH in the long run. And identifying aspects of survivor-centered approach that can be implemented in their operations. In terms of timing, most of these assessments can be undertaken at any point, but of course, it is best to integrate them into a company or an investor's processes as early as possible so that it is a strong foundation to build on and can develop or expand based on the company's businesses as well. A GBVH risk assessment isn't a one-off risk assessment. There is ongoing monitoring which should be implemented. because risk factors change over time. If the company is continuously reviewing GBVH risks, it will be able to identify any changes and respond to them more effectively than if a risk assessment was done one-off at a very early stage and not revisited again. Monitoring also helps to determine whether companies' efforts to address GBVH are effective as well. The next step of a GBVH management system is establishing a GBVH policy. Company policies and code of conducts are very important to establish efforts to prevent and address GBVH. It is important to get the text and the content right, but what is really key to a good GBVH policy is that there is strong leadership commitment to its objectives and a level of ownership and responsibility for its implementation. A good GBVH policy generally consists of a clear definition and prohibition of all types of GBVH, with some examples of unacceptable behavior. Clearly outlines who is within the scope of the policy. So for the purpose of this webinar, the policy will need to clearly outline that agents or commission-based agents, or the terminology that is preferred, are within the scope of the GBVH policy and a specific code of conduct perhaps. There will also be a need to outline the setting in which the policy applies, so making it very clear that it within work-related operations and work-related travel. And then also clearly outlining disciplinary measures for policy violation, including false allegations, and commitments to implementing a survivor-centered approach. The policy should be ideally signed off by someone senior in the organization and reviewed on a regular basis. Once the policy is finalized, it is important to communicate this. So it, again, as I mentioned, it has to be underpinned by senior leadership, communicated to all relevant stakeholders. So this can be as part of the contract, as part of ongoing updates to HR contracts or HR code of conducts, employee handbooks, code of conducts for agents. And finally, the policy needs to be in a language and format that is inclusive. So online, for example, perhaps signages within the communities where the agents operate in, and in a language that is easily understood by most agents as well. Another good practice suggestion is for the policy to be developed through consultation with relevant stakeholders so that all needs and concerns are taken into account when developing this. The next step is having a gender sensitive reporting channel. So if a company has not received any GBVH incidents, it doesn't necessarily mean that there is no GBVH risk in the operations. It could be an indication for the company to revisit the reporting channels available for escalating incidents and to assess if they are accessible and effective, and if sales agents, workers, community members trust in the system. Having a grievance mechanism that is well equipped to deal with complaints of a sensitive nature and meets the requirements of a survivor-centered approach is crucial for managing GBVH risks. As a first step, companies should consider whether it is necessary to establish a separate procedure or a standalone grievance mechanism to manage complaints of GBVH, given the sensitive nature of the incidents. When developing a gender-sensitive reporting channel, we would suggest including these factors. So ensuring that there are multiple channels available for agents to report incidents. These could be both formal and informal channels. So formal channels could be things like an email ID, a toll-free phone number, an app button that goes to a chat, perhaps. Informal reporting channels could be escalation to the local area manager or, the direct reporting line. But those individuals will need to be trained on confidentiality, escalation, and supporting survivors as well. The grievance mechanism needs to emphasize protection from retaliation. So that is ensuring commitment to ensuring confidence and providing support to survivors as and when required. There will need to be ongoing awareness undertaken through, training, external communication, regular updates on these channels, how to use them, and what kind of grievances or concerns can be raised. Good practice also requires that grievance mechanisms for GBVH should have an option for reporting anonymous incidents as well. It is difficult to investigate anonymous grievance incidents reported by channels. However, this provides an option for survivors to report incidents with zero fear of retaliation. And hence, we would recommend that this is established as well. Moving on to training. So obviously it's great to have a policy, a procedure, and a risk assessment in place, to have it reviewed by senior management and, by individuals within organizations. However, it is very ineffective if it's not communicated to agents. So training and awareness raisings among agents is central for preventing and responding to incidents. It is an opportunity for company leadership to send a clear message to agents that the company is committed to addressing GBVH, and can work with stakeholders and survivors to learn more about what constitutes GBVH, how to report it, and the process followed internally to investigate incidents, support survivors, and respond to risks in the business. Training needs to be tailored and proportionate to the organization's risks, as well as the sector and country context, as we've already discussed. When we're looking at training of agents, so these are gig workers, commission-based agents, given the nature of work, there are multiple interventions that can be designed. So one is the official during onboarding training. GBVH should be included as part of the onboarding training for all field agents. This should include things like clear messaging around the company's expectations on behavior, how to recognize signs of GBVH. So, what do we mean by GBVH? What are the different forms of GBVH and how can this occur? Risk awareness and safe practices for fieldwork. So, whilst they are undertaking their operation, what is the behavior to follow? What are the risk indicators to look out for? The consequences, so the disciplinary measures that will be taken if an agent is seen as a perpetrator of an incident, and also for agents to make a report if they experience a GBVH incident either on field or post that incident as well. So this provides agents with an initial understanding about expectations, zero tolerance or low tolerance commitments, disciplinary measures, both as perpetrators of incidents and also for false allegations, and also how to make a report if they are unfortunately experiencing an incident as well. Apart from the onboarding training, ongoing awareness and communication is again key. With the sales agent model, there is a very informal working environment. Agents could sign up on day one and then not turn up for a couple of months, or it's quite inconsistent, and hence having regular training is key in ensuring the messaging continues and people are aware of the expectations. Regular awareness raising could be through things like sharing of text messages. WhatsApp groups is something that is being used quite often by most agents these days. So having a WhatsApp group with like daily or weekly reminders, toolbox talks ahead of field visits, that re-emphasizes the GBVH risk factors, what to look out for, how to report incidents, and commitments and survivor support. There's also other interventions that can be considered. So option for paid training days where agents, attend to undergo more enhanced training on GBVH risk factor identification and how to prevent this. Apart from the general awareness raising for agents, companies should also provide specific training for resources or teams that manage incidents. So these are things like on confidentiality, which is key, survivor-centered support, approach for investigating incidents and responding to agents that have experienced this incident. Just linked to that, this is a general approach to responding to GBVH incidents. However, companies that are faced with complex situations should seek tailored guidance from GBVH legal or child protection experts. So when an incident is received, the company needs to immediately ensure that any survivors or witnesses are safe from further retaliation and offer further support. This is step one that needs to be taken by the company, and hence any resources that are receiving incidents should be trained on what services are available and the approach to escalation. Companies need to assign resources to lead the response. So this is the actual investigation of the incident. This includes things like having interviews with survivors, witnesses, alleged perpetrators, reviewing other material data such as CCTV footage, communication, documents, and any other policies, procedures that are relevant. So they would either be supported by an external specialist, depending on how severe a case is, or if they are in-house specialty available, this could be done in-house as well. This will also be the stage where companies will need to assess if incidents should be escalated to legal authorities. So if incidents that occur are seen to be in breach of local law, then incidents will need to be escalated to legal authorities, and then the company's responsibility is to work closely with legal authorities to provide them with all information required to complete investigations. Um, this will also be the point where, depending on the nature of the incident, companies will need to decide if external expertise is required. This could be situations where, for example, if there is involvement of children, so anyone under the age of 18, requiring specific child protection support, any refugees or other kind of vulnerable stakeholders that could increase the risk of the GBVH incident, etc. When you're conducting an investigation, it could include multiple aspects. It could include interviews, reviewing of evidence, engaging with other external, so local authorities, community members, etc. Throughout the entire process, the company needs to ensure that confidentiality and survivor support is maintained. So, offering survivors support services such as medical, legal, financial aid should be step one, and then an ongoing check-in to ensure the survivor and any witnesses are free of retaliation and have not faced any kind of additional threats from the alleged perpetrator is also key. Post the outcome of an investigation, companies should also review corrective actions that can be implemented in the broader operations to reduce the risk of a repeat incident from occurring. Companies should use incidents to undertake a kind of root cause analysis in a way to identify where company policies or procedures didn't work or weren't accessible, and identify measures to further improve the overall GBVH management system. And then finally, as you know, we keep repeating ourselves, but it is very key to emphasize the need for confidentiality and following reporting protocols, both within the organization, but also with any survivors and witnesses involved. Um, these are some of the good practice suggestions that we've identified working with multiple companies in the sector. We've divided into three broad buckets, which are, again, sort of the key pillars for effective GBVH risk management. So one is training and awareness raising. So when looking at, training the sales agent workforce or the gig workforce, which is quite informal, as we mentioned, we need to ensure that all relevant documentation or training are available in local languages. It is in a format that is accessible. So generally, this is done to the mobile app or platform that is used to onboard agents and monitor them. Companies send, like updates every couple of months, like a very short, like case study on this is what GBVH risk is, this is how we manage it, this is the company's commitment to survivor support. Undertaking regular surveys and focus group discussions through the app can help companies identify if agents are actually using the systems, are aware of the company's stance on GBVH, and if there's any risks that hasn't been identified. Um, Another form of training and awareness raising is actually undertaking some awareness raising sessions with the community as a whole. So these are the areas from which companies will likely recruit sales agents, will likely have potential customers. So undertaking more awareness raising with key stakeholders in the community, so such as the chief leaders, the religious leaders, the local authorities, would further enhance the messaging that the company has on GBVH. And this is important both for sales agents as well as for existing and potential customers who might either face or perpetrate incidents themselves. It is key to involve senior management, which further kind of cements the commitments that companies have during these trainings and workshops. The grievance mechanism and reporting channels. So we've seen some companies introduce an emergency button or a panic button through the mobile app, and this is for the immediate escalation of incidents. So there's a dedicated team or resource behind this button who immediately gets in touch with the agent or tries to locate them to provide them with support or help them out of the situation that they are facing. Having multiple reporting channels, as we've discussed earlier, both formal and informal, is again seen to be quite effective. With the informal working models, however, it should be noted that the resources, so either the sales agent lead or the area lead, is trained on how to manage GBVH incidents and knows the correct protocol for reporting or escalating incidents and not breaching confidentiality. Another form for grievance mechanism is having sort of visual posters and communication about the grievance mechanism policies. We've seen some companies also introduce QPR codes, so it can just be scanned to report an incident, and having that in the local communities, in the local community offices, etc., really increases the visibility on the channels that can be used for escalating incidents. And then finally, survivor support. So we've seen it be most effective when companies appoint dedicated resources who are sufficiently trained to follow up and engage with survivors. So these resources are trained on what maintaining confidentiality means, engaging with customers that have suffered from GBVH, and providing services based on their needs, requests, and what's most useful for them. Um, Companies that partner with local organizations and survivor support have been able to access these services more effectively and in a timely manner. So these are organizations like women NGOs, human rights organizations, mental health support groups, etc., that can get involved when an incident occurs and provide survivors with support such as mental health counseling, legal support, financial support, etc., to support in them in making the decision to either, go ahead with the legal case, change locations for their employment, or just support them from a medical perspective as well. Um, we've also seen companies provide paid leave for sales agents to allow them time to recuperate from the incident, and take the time needed for them to regain sort of their mental health strength and physical strength to return to the workplace as well. These are some of the good practices that have come up, but we've also seen that some companies do go on a maturity journey. So from the initial days of setting up the GBV systems, where there isn't enough indication or risk factors that's identified, to having more comprehensive controls, more comprehensive trainings to identify what the heightened risk factors are based on some of the incident data, based on the feedback from the focus group discussions that they've had with agents, and just the ongoing awareness raising that they undertake with community. Right. So the final sort of implementation support that's required from companies is having the senior management commitment in there. GBVH is a key ENS risk that is increasingly scrutinized by investors, regulators, also customers. The board and senior management play a very critical role in shaping corporate culture to ensure a respectful and inclusive environment for all. The board can demonstrate leadership and commitment to GBVH risk governance by multiple factors. Through policy and commitment, they can ensure that the company has strong public commitments on GBVH practices, low tolerance for false allegations, low tolerance for breach of code of conduct, and also promoting diversity of representation at the board level. Senior management participation and training awareness has also shown to be more effective when it comes to agents implementing codes of conduct and customers following expectations as well. When it comes to the GBVH risk management systems and the procedures, the board and senior management play a huge role in ensuring that sufficient resources are made available to support in implementing a survivor-centered approach, to support in undertaking investigations, undertaking risk assessments, and developing follow-ups and corrective actions from this. Reporting channels are confidential. As mentioned, they should be accessible by the relevant stakeholders, the sales agents, the customers, the employees, and there should also be clear guidelines on when incidents are escalated to senior management and board. Confidentiality and survivor support needs to be ensured when escalating any incidents to board and senior management. However, the escalation helps them understand the kind of risks that are occurring in the workplace and steps to be taken to mitigate this as well. So as mentioned, GBVH reports are encouraged by the board, should be encouraged by the board, and incidents discussed at the board level, maintaining confidentiality. They should also be a process to discuss trends, updates to risk assessments, findings from feedback surveys, from focus group discussions, and just discussions with ongoing stakeholders that is discussed regularly at the board level. The board has a unique position in identifying elements for a robust system and providing resources needed for companies to establish the controls and transparency around GBVH. Depending on the company size and scale of operations, the board could also consider appointing a board champion to lead on GBVH risk. And this individual would be responsible for, assessing trends, opining on sufficiency of the systems and the need for further sort of updates, additions to the team, or like partnerships that could support in the wider organizational growth. But again, this is a core element of bringing together the various aspects of a GBVH management system at a company and ecosystem level to ensure the uptake of reporting channels, to ensure survivor-centered services are offered on a regular basis, and that the company is able to establish a safe and strong working place for all of their stakeholders. So, as a summary, so we've discussed quite a few topics today in a very short amount of time. But some of the key takeaways is that businesses are responsible for providing a safe working place and protecting customers and clients who might be exposed to these operations. A vital aspect of that is assessing and managing GBVH risks that could occur in their operations. Whilst GBVH can occur in most sectors, gig workers, sales agents, commission-based agents are at a higher risk of vulnerability due to various factors related to their informal working model and incentive-based payment structures. Not only does GBVH impact the physical and mental well-being of survivors and witnesses, but mismanagement can also have an impact on the commercial value of a business. When adopting a GBVH management systems, companies need to first assess where these risks occur in their operations, put in place policies and reporting channels to prevent incidents, ensure adequately trained resources are responsible for investigating complaints and supporting survivors, and have a continuous improvement approach to monitoring effectiveness of GBVH systems and awareness in the workforce. Ensuring survivors and witnesses are supported during and after an investigation is vital for developing trust in a GBVH management system and also ensuring that survivors and witnesses are protected from further retaliation. It is critical to ensure a strong response-based approach is developed in the workplace as well, which can be strengthened over time. Senior management support and participation is key in raising awareness, providing sufficient resources, and ensuring accountability and transparency in the organization. We have developed quite a few resources on the topic itself. So both GOGLA and BII have had various resources on harassment, discrimination, gender-based violence harassment, including multiple tools and templates that could help you start this journey, including a GBVH policy template, a guidance to integrating GBVH into grievance mechanisms, and a note explaining what survivor-centered approach is and how this can be integrated in a company's approach to engaging with their employees and workforce. There is also guidance for the role that the board and senior management play when it comes to GBVH oversight, and that provides key KPIs and criteria that can be considered by senior management as well. With that, let me hand over to Rebecca to summarize some of the discussions we've been having. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think just before we do that and get to the Q&A, in case anyone has any questions, we have a couple of feedback polls as well that can really help inform us. So one of the points raised was the buy-in from senior managers. And we're really interested to see who we've actually reached with the webinar today. So could you raise the poll just so we get kind of a litmus test on who's in the room and who is kind of interested in this topic. This is an area, as both Sarah and Akshara said, that we want to work on more next year, and we'll really kind of be developing and building on the existing resources shared here. And so we'd like to get feedback from companies on what would be helpful to them, what is the need that can really help inform the work that we do to develop a useful toolkit for off-grid solar companies in this area. Puck, if you could share the results, please. Okay, so a good mix actually of A lot of ESG managers, which is great to see, investors across the board and TA providers, and actually a bit lower on the C-suite and company board members. So I think, again, there's a bit of need to make sure that we are reaching across that senior management to get buy-in and engagement and almost championing the approach to GBVH across companies. And yes, if you could also share the feedback question, which is really just asking you to share what extra resources would help you to support implementation from the webinar today. And whilst you do that, I think we can go ahead to the Q&A. So yeah, feel free to raise your hand, ask any questions. Akshara has a huge amount of experience to share as well, so please feel free.
Thank you so much. Since we're now going to the Q&A session, we will also stop the recording. So if there are any